So we do have one question about why do we have to wear different types of colored clothing on holidays? So maybe if you can repeat a little bit more about the colors.
Yeah, so the colors have a lot of cultural significance in India. So, like I said earlier, white is worn for purity. So, like when we in America go to funerals, we wear black, and black is our symbol of mourning. And so, in that same way, they have significance in India. So, the different colors are representative of whatever emotion that the holiday or the event is trying to convey. So, white is worn because yes, people are in mourning, but it's this time of remembering this person's life and remembering what the purity of life is, and honoring them. And while you're sad, still remembering that everything that their life stood for was really important, and it's time to let them move on. And then for weddings, like I'd mentioned, people typically wear red or gold. And so red is a really big symbol of, um, like I said, fertility. So it's this idea that these people are going to get married and start a family. And so those are just two common colors. There's not really a specific color associated with any other event, but a lot of events, it'll be like shades of clothing. So Diwali is typically a time of like really like light, happy colors. I can't really think of a time when the dress in India is very somber. It's always about like seeing the brighter side to things. So the colors just have a different meaning, the same way that funerals do here.
And another example for the United States, sometimes people wear like red and green around Christmas time, or they wear white dress at a wedding. So we sometimes do that too. The next question is, why do they wear certain types of kilts at sporting events in Scotland?
In France. Well, yeah, the kilt actually, when it originated, it was a really great alternative to pants, because if a warrior or a Highland army person got caught on something, it was easy that he could rip it off or get away from it, because he wasn't confined by pants, which are a little bit harder. And in the Highlands, it's very wet and like very kind of nasty cold weather all the time. So the fabric of kilts, which is wool, was also very good fabric for that area. So it kept their legs dry and didn't hold on to moisture. So I think that the versatility of the kilt historically kind of transitioned into how can we incorporate it today into symbols that people still see. So I think it kind of got incorporated into a sporting event because of kind of that historical element, because it does represent Scotland on such a large and patriotic scale. But also I think it's just kind of a niche thing. It's something that Scotland can say, look, that's us. We're the ones with the kilts. So a lot of their sporting teams, mostly soccer, will be wearing kilts traditionally. So it's just another way for Scotland to kind of distinguish themselves from other people and kind of relate that to their history.
We're starting to get questions. If you want to go to the next slide, and then we'll.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask us in the chat. We're going to answer them as best we can.
You can stop the share, the red button at the top. All right, so the next question is, are the marriages still prearranged in India?
So it depends on where you live, I guess, or like what your family's ideas of marriage are. So my parents actually are a prearranged marriage. So that was really common in older times, and it's still common today, especially in places in India that are a lot smaller, that are maybe more close knit, or the people in the town know each other better than we would in a town in America, like a bigger town. So not all of them. I would say that it's moving more towards most of them not being prearranged, especially because people are moving around so much. So there's people from India who live all around the world. So to answer your question short, yes, but it's not as common.
And why do they have different patterns for different tribes or families in Scotland for the kilts?
Yeah, so that actually is an interesting little history side note. So when I mentioned earlier that King George kind of had some animosity towards Scotland, he actually banned kilts for a while. And then when that ban was lifted, another king eventually came to Scotland and had the association of kilts so strongly in his mind that he did kind of this tour of Scotland. And there was a guy, and I can't remember his name, but he basically went around to a lot of different clans in Scotland and said, look, you need to wear your kilts because the king's coming and he wants to see them. So what ended up happening was a lot of these weavers and just textile workers started making a bunch of different patterns because suddenly a lot of people were like, oh, or we're supposed to have an identity. We're supposed to have a clan kilt, a tartan pattern. So a lot of them are actually fabricated by different weavers in, I think it was like the 18th century. So the association to the clan does go back as far as around then, but as far as why they are that way, like why certain clans and certain families have distinct patterns, it kind of comes down to the weaver that made them and was like, oh, like this looks like a good one for you guys, so you guys take that. So it does have some history because it does go back to around the 1800s, but as far as why they are a certain pattern, it really just depended on whoever the weaver was making it and kind of how they agreed to make a pattern for a clan. So it's a very interesting history about how they came to be, but ultimately it was just kind of a single person's decision just to make a certain pattern, and they've stuck all through this day, so they're pretty prevalent.
So the next question is, what is the origin of the bindi, specifically the red bindi in the center of a woman's forehead in India?
So I am not 100% sure on the origin, but I think that it starts with a lot of the ancient scriptures in India. So there's the Vedas, which are like kind of like our version, like the Christian version of the Bible, but there are 4 of them. So the 4 Vedas each have like a different story to tell, or each have a different ideal that they're representing. And a lot of the goddesses are depicted in that way. I'm not sure that it specifically says red bindis, but that's where they come from, is from religious portrayals of it. So the goddesses that are married, whoever first started making the idols, so they're like small idols that are in all of the all of the Indian temples. It's based on their dress and just a symbol of a symbol of marital status of the goddesses that maybe aren't married or the goddesses that are.
The question is Scotland still considered an extension of England? So maybe a little bit about the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Scotland is actually one of 5 countries that is part of the United Kingdom. And it is connected via land, so you can drive from England to Scotland. It's just a border like you would see between states in the United States. So it's free. You can go between the border if you're a UK citizen without having to check your passport or anything. So it is still connected by land, but it is not a part of England. So England is a separate country. So there's England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and one other country that I'm forgetting in the UK. But Scotland is a part of the United Kingdom, but it is not a part of England, if that clarifies that.
And what is henna made of? Or can you tell us a little bit more about henna?
So traditional henna is made of like herb paste. So henna comes in this little tube that's like kind of triangular. It smells very earthy. It's I'm not actually sure everything that it's made of, but it's something natural that a lot of it is like synthetic. So very like people have made henna nowadays to make it so that it'll add more color to your hands. But in the traditional times, it was made of different crushed up herbs, like made into a paste.
What happens if you don't wear the traditional clothes or the right clothing to an event in India?
So I guess it would be pretty similar to like showing up to a wedding wearing a white dress when you're not the bride. It's kind of awkward, I guess, in a way. Kind of like a social faux pas, something that you don't really do. So there's, like I said, there's some holidays and festivals where it's not really, it's just a certain style of clothing. It's not really like you have to wear this, whereas like at a funeral, like it is expected that you wear white. So like you wouldn't show up to a funeral in America wearing like bright red or like yellow or something. So it's more of like a respect thing for the people who are, whether it's a wedding for like the bride and the groom and their families, or if it's a funeral for the family of the person that they lost. So I don't think that there's any specific actions that happen, but it's definitely like a social like no.
So the question is, why do men wear skirts in Scotland? So again, why they do it, and maybe about reinforce when they do and when they wear traditional or modern clothing.
Yeah. So there's actually a distinction between a skirt and a kilt. So it does look similar to a skirt that you might assume, but it is a traditional piece of clothing in Scotland. So the kilt is worn because of its, when it was essentially when it became prevalent in the 16th century, a lot of these Highlanders are mountain villagers, and they don't really have access to a lot of materials. So the way the kilt came about was it was this long piece of fabric that you could kind of wrap around your body and change and make it different styles, like as you wished. So it was this one piece of fabric that a lot of people could have if they didn't have a lot of money to purchase a lot of other clothes, and you can make it really versatile and wear it in a lot of different ways. So that's how the traditional element of wearing something that doesn't look like pants came about. So that's kind of how it started, and it just continued because of that deep-rooted history and the tradition with how people wore it. And then I know I focused a lot on like how the kilt has evolved and people wearing the kilts, but people in Scotland do also wear pants. They don't always wear kilts all the time. It's just a very historically significant part of their identity in this fashion piece. But yeah, they typically wear it if you're having a big event like a big dance or a wedding or a big celebration. They will wear kilts, but some people like to wear them every day. Like when I was studying abroad, you could walk down the street and see people wearing kilts in 30-degree weather, and that was normal. And it's kind of like if some people like to wear dresses or skirts to school, and then some people just like to wear sweatpants. So it's kind of just depends on personal taste. And because the kilt is kind of evolving and using different fabrics like leather and denim, and people are incorporating it into more modern attire, it's become more acceptable and kind of more common to see these different elements every day. So it's not totally uncommon to see someone wearing a kilt just every day, but I would say typically they only wear them for special occasions, really.
And what do the men wear under their kilts?
So yeah, traditionally men would wear nothing under the kilts. It would just be the fabric. But today it is most people are wearing undergarments or pants under their kilt. And then as far as like shoes and stuff are concerned, they'll wear like knee-high socks and like some hefty boots. But traditionally, nothing under the kilts.
And in India, do they kill animals and give thanks for the meat?
So it depends on what parts of India that you live in. So the part that my family is from is like religiously vegetarian. So for the most part, the part of India that my family comes from does not kill animals because we don't eat animals. So there is still using like animal furs, or not furs, but like using different parts of animals besides the meat. But I would say that in areas of India where they do kill animals, it's very common to see, especially in the more rural areas, that they do give thanks for the meat that they kill. A lot of the time, though, it's a lot like how we buy meat from the grocery store here. So it's not so different from the way it is here, but they do still do that in parts of India.
And do they celebrate Christmas in either of your countries? Is the question.
No, not in India. We do not celebrate Christmas.
They do celebrate Christmas in Scotland. They also have their bigger holiday, though, I would say, is called Hogmanay, which is their equivalent of New Year's. So a lot of businesses might not give employees or workers Christmas off because Hogmanay is such a big holiday, and that's just a week away after Christmas. So typically the Christmas celebration, it is celebrated, but it might be a little smaller scale than what we see in America, where tons of people are going out and buying gifts and stores shut down for like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Whereas in Scotland, Christmas might just be another day. And then Hogmanay, which is their New Year's celebration, is a whole 4-day affair. So they'll give people lots of time off around that. So that's when you typically go and visit family if they're far from you, or you'll have meals with them and celebrate. So they do celebrate Christmas, but it's not as big as it is here in America.
And can you repeat why King George made the kilts illegal?
Yeah, so that actually goes back. So Scotland and England kind of had a very tense history. So King George was King of England, but Scotland was also incorporated under kind of like a part of England at that time. And so his jurisdiction carried over to Scotland, and he was kind of battling with resistance in the Highlands. So a lot of the Highlanders just were very opposed to an English king ruling their territory. And so King George, in order to kind of suppress these rebels and it was kind of like a way for him to easily identify the people who were defying him and his rules. So he outlawed the kilt so that he could see if you were wearing a kilt, then you were opposed to my rule, is kind of how he rationalized it. So a lot of the Highlanders continued to wear kilts because it was part of their identity and part of how they dressed and how they recognized themselves and their clan identity. And so to King George and his armies that were in Scotland, they were able to easily identify kind of rebels or enemies of the state based on that dress act. And so it only lasted for a couple of years because it wasn't very effective. I don't think a lot of people followed it because they did see the kilt as a symbol of national pride and patriotism. But yeah, it was essentially a way for him to kind of scout out people who were not fans of him.
And why do they dress so fancy in India?
So I guess it would be the equivalent. So because their clothing style is so different, I wouldn't say that to them it's fancy. It's fancy to us because it's different. So we think of like for women, they typically wear skirts. Like we think like, oh, like a skirt is kind of fancy, but that's very traditional for women in India. So if you think back to like American history, when women only wore dresses or women only wore like tops and skirts and women never wore pants, we would consider that fancy now relatively, because most women in America tend to wear pants most of the time. So I wouldn't say that it's fancy, but a lot of their clothing is adorned. So with me, I have one of the shawls that you can typically see in India. So you see like a gold border with these like golden circular accents. And this is actually one of the simpler styles. So women will typically wear it like around their neck like this, or over their shoulder, or it's common to see at funerals with it over their heads. So like it's a symbol of like respect. So I wouldn't say that it's fancy to them. It's all very simple to them. And a lot of the time women do wear pants. So like I said, in the modern clothing of India, women will wear like the top of the salwar kameez with leggings. So I guess to them, it's not really fancy. It's just what they wear.
And what are the most popular foods in each of your countries? Some of the common dishes.
So in Scotland, you've probably heard of haggis. If you haven't, haggis is a very traditional food in Scotland that's eaten for many celebrations. And it's like a sheep's stomach, and then a lot of its intestines kind of ground up. It's actually I like it a lot. It just tastes like a hamburger, honestly, if you compare it. It's just meat. But the traditional dish that they eat for a lot of celebrations is called haggis, neeps, and tatties. And so that's haggis, what I just mentioned, which is the sheep's meat. And neeps is turnips. And then tatties is potatoes. So it's like a traditional meal of haggis, turnips, and potatoes that are kind of all just on a little dish. And that's just a standard serving that people can have. You can eat it for lunch, dinner, special occasions. It's everywhere in Scotland. Every restaurant you go into probably has a variation on haggis, neeps, and tatties.
So in India, I would say that there are like kind of levels of food. So food is really big in India. So one thing that really comes to mind for me, one of my favorite foods, is called well, it's called different things depending on where you are. In some places they're called golgappa, and in some places they're called pani puri, which is what I call them from where my parents are from, which is more like northern central India. Um, so they're like these small, like round, circular, like kind of like pastries, but very light. They're not pastries. It's like pastry dough. And so what you do is they're circular and you kind of poke a hole through the top and you fill it with different things. So there's Bani means water, so it's like this type of water that has spices in it. So it's like you can make it either sweet or spicy. Personally, I like the spicier water. So you add that. You add some roasted chickpeas. A lot of time people will add chickpeas, certain kinds of beans and potatoes. And you can also add like different sauces, and those are typically like at stalls. So so like India, like in India we have restaurants and we have like stalls everywhere. So it's kind of like you would imagine a food truck, except they're not trucks and they're everywhere. So like here, food trucks are more like you have to call one in type deal. So that's one of my personal favorites. And other really common ones are dosas, which are made of the same really light like dough. It's not dough. I can't think of batter. It's a really light batter that you fry and then you fold it into like kind of like a cylinder, and you oftentimes will eat it with chutney, which is a different kind of sauce, or with different like you can add different things. So people will add cheese. A lot of times in dosa places in America, people will add like chocolate inside them, which I'm personally not a fan of. But you'll also see a lot of different types of dishes that feature potatoes, different kinds of like gravy within the food. There's not really, I mean, of course, there's foods in India that are like specific to India, but a lot of them are variations on the same thing. So there'll be like variations with potatoes or variations with chicken. So there's stuff like that.
And I don't know if you know this, but if you know anything about working conditions for some of the factories in India by chance?
So I can't say that I visited a factory in India, but I will say that with like a lot of the things that we learn here, we learn that there are really bad conditions, and I think that that is true for some places. So a lot of um, this might be a little complicated, but a lot of things from America get outsourced to India. So like you'll see made in India or like made in China on things. And it's because things that we're bringing into America are made in other countries. And so it has a lot to do with economy. So the American dollar is worth 55 rupees, or between 45 and 55, depending on what time of year you go. So that's like the exchange rate. So it's a lot cheaper to produce things in India than it might be to produce them in America. So people will often have them made there. Some of the factory conditions are really bad, especially because like the political infrastructures of India are very complicated because there's so many people there that have so many different interests that it's difficult to represent them. And there's of course corruption and things that the government does wrong. So I would say that some of them are bad, but I wouldn't say that like all of them are the same. Like we have bad conditions at places here and we have better conditions. So it's definitely improving. It's something that there are people are forming unions to improve the conditions. And so they're getting better with time.
And what are some of the other holidays that they celebrate in your countries?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned Hogmanay, which is their New Year's Eve celebration, which is probably one of the biggest celebrations that Scotland does. And then on January 25th every year, they have Burns Day or Burns Night, which celebrates a Scottish poet, Robert Burns, and he is essentially Scotland's like literary hero. He wrote a poem about haggis because he loves it so much. So Scotland loves to read. Typically, they'll read that poem at a big banquet, and everyone will dance. They'll have a ceilidh. So Burns Night is a huge celebration for them, and that's January 25th. And then as far as other holidays, I'm not certain. I do know in Edinburgh there's a huge summer festival, and in August, kind of all around Scotland, people consider it to be festival season. So there's tons of music festivals going on. The festival in Edinburgh where I was is called Fringe Festival. So it's a huge deal. And to me, it was like a holiday because there's so many people there, and it's just a huge celebration, and there's music and bands and food, and so that was a big deal. But Burns Day and Hogmanay, which are both in December and January, are probably two of the biggest holidays that Scotland celebrates.
So in India, a lot of the holidays are really towards the end of the year. So pretty s- are so earlier this year, probably in around October, September area, there was this festival called Navratri, and it roughly translates to 9 nights. It's based on a story about war. I can't remember if it's a religious story or if it's just an old like Indian folklore type thing, but essentially like these soldiers go out, and for these 9 nights they are fighting this battle, and finally on the ninth night they succeed. And so it's this idea that for this whole 9 nights, like they've been fighting this battle for so long, and to celebrate that victory. And it's based on a the it's like partially religious, because the idea is that one particular goddess helps with this success. And so her name is Kali. She's the goddess of war. And so that's pretty popular. So what happens at those festivals is women will come typically in saris or chanya jewelries if you're younger and you can't arrange a sari. The women will come and they'll dance in circles. And so there's usually the circles are the biggest is the simplest circle, so the easiest dance. And as you move in, the dance gets more and more complicated with typically like the religious figure of Kali in the middle, or like an offering to her somewhere in the middle of all the circles. And people dance, and there's typically live music at wherever the event is. And after that, later in the night, people will dance, but they'll dance in two parallel lines with sticks. So it involves like a particular pattern of how you beat your sticks and how you turn in the line. So one line is men typically, and one line is women. And then as you get to the end of the line, you just switch over. So it's like a continuous circle of people just dancing. And it's a really big, like, people tell you not to do this, is to join the line without a partner, because if there's uneven number of people, there's always one person who gets left out. So that's kind of fun. The sticks are called dandiya. So that's one event. Like I mentioned, Diwali, which just passed, it's like a 5-day festival. It's Indian New Year's. We celebrate a lot of the births of the different gods and goddesses. So one particular one that I remember growing up is the birth of the god Krishna. And so there's stories about how he used to really like churn butter. And so like we'll offer that to him, and then we have a little idol of him that my mom brought back from India, and we'll like dress him up, and like there are small clothes that you're supposed to put on the idol to celebrate like his birthday. So things like that.
And what languages do they speak in India? And if you know any languages, can you say like a few words?
Yeah, of course. So there are a lot of different languages in India. So a lot of people speak English. My cousins who live in India actually they go to school and they speak only English there. There's Tamil, Telugu, there's Hindi, and then the one that I speak is Gujarati. So I'll just say like my name is Shama in Gujarati. So the way you would say that is Maru naam cha Sama. So in India, like the SH sound doesn't really exist. So like my name, like when I'm speaking to people in America, I say Shama, but the way that my parents pronounce my name is Sama. So it's like the syllables are a little bit different in the way the vowels work, because Indian is a script-based language. So it's not like the traditional like letters that we see. So there's a little bit of a shift in how you say things.
What types of shoes do they wear in both countries? So a little bit about shoe fashion, if there's anything in particular that you want to share.
In Scotland, you better have a good pair of snow boots because it is always very cold and wet. So most people have a very good pair of sturdy boots that they're wearing all the time. But it's typically like the same shoes you would see around. There's tons of people who wear just like tennis shoes or sneakers. I saw some people wearing flip-flops. I would not be doing that. It's too cold for those, but people wear all kinds of shoes, just like you see here. But I would say boots are pretty prevalent because it does snow and rain a lot. So you got to have a good pair of shoes for that.
In India, it's a lot of the same. So a lot of people wear like tennis shoes. What's really popular is sandals, especially for men. So like we don't see as many men wear sandals in America, but it's pretty popular there. A lot of there's not really a lot of like mud there. It's very like dusty is what their soil is like. So people typically wear flip-flops or they'll wear sandals or like even any type of closed-toed shoes like tennis shoes, etc. So it's still pretty similar. For fancier occasions, women will wear like fancy like their heels, but they're like flip-flop heels. Like they've got the two straps, and the straps are typically like adorned with some type of like jewel pattern.
Is the cow still considered holy in India?
Yes. So there are a lot of different gods and goddesses in India, and one of them is a cow. So we also have a god that's an elephant. So the cow is still considered really holy in India. So even if people aren't vegetarians, they typically won't eat beef at all. There are some places in India where they do, but a lot of people would eat lamb. I personally, the only meat that I eat is chicken. So yes, the cow is still considered very holy in religious practice in India.
And there's a question, what traditional symbols do you have in your houses? Or maybe if you, like Mary Glen, if you brought any souvenirs back from Scotland, or Shama, if you have anything traditional in your parents' home, if you guys want to share, you can.
Yeah, so in my house, so I have moved twice, but every time there's something that's really consistent about how we acknowledge our culture. So a really big thing is that we have like this small version of a temple. So like it's this like small shrine with like religious figures inside, decorated in like these particular cloths that are red. With like gold edges and a big picture of one of the goddesses. So it depends on what part of India you're from, like which gods and goddesses are really important to you because there's so many of them. But that's something that we have in my house that's really important. We also have like this plaque of the Om symbols, like peace essentially. And so we have that in my house. We have small religious figures. So when I came to college, my mom gave me this like little platform with the god that I'd mentioned earlier that is an elephant inside. That god is called Ganesh. And so like I have the small little like like figure of him. And there's also things that aren't necessarily particularly Indian, but are featured in our house because of our culture. So out front of my house, we have these like elephant like statues essentially that are very influenced by our Indian culture and the Indian god. They don't look like that god, but elephants are still really important in the culture. And then we have there's always been something in my house that features a peacock of some kind. So like peacocks are really important in Indian culture, like as a symbol. They're just beautiful